Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Right Balance Show. This particular one, I'm very excited about it because we are joined by Brad Folkens from I Ask. He's a serial entrepreneur and technologist that I definitely had my eye on him before we even joined to this show. Welcome, Brad, and Alex. I'll let you to drive as always.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Ruben. Thanks for the intro. So, Brad, thanks for joining the show. And I wanted to kick it off with my usual question. So, obviously, there's lots of technology that you've been involved with over years. So, what brought you into it?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed technology, even from an early age. I got started programming when I was about 5 years old. And what really excited me about it at the time is I had played around a lot with electronics. So, like, wiring things together and stuff like that. And I always liked building things, like having an idea and then turning it into something. And what really excited me about programming is that I could have an idea for something I wanted to build, and then I could build it, basically for free. So, electronics, you have to buy the materials, and then every once in a while you wire it up wrong and you blow something up and you got to go out and buy more. And so as a kid, I was like, oh, I can make these things and I can make the software and build products and do it, basically for free. If you could think of something, you can sit down and write some code and make it happen. So that really got me excited about tinkering around on very early versions of compute. At the time, a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with the Commodore 64. I had one of these computers, early, mid 80s kind of computers called the TI 994A. And you'd have to type in all this, code in order to program it. And there wasn't a very good way. Now we're used to hard drives and floppy disks and all that stuff. Well, in order to save the program or load up a program later, you had to store it on a cassette, like a tape. And to store it on the tape, you had to play it like audibly into a cassette recorder and then play it back audibly. And it would take like 5 to 10 minutes to load or store a program. So it was a lot of this, back and forth, tinkering around. And I just liked that stuff. I always was enjoyed it. But then, later on in life, as I started getting ideas for and working with people that had ideas for bigger products. And so I learned C and C++ when I think it was like 12 or 13 years old. And then that's when I really started getting, much deeper into like more professional programming.
Yeah, it's interesting that the more we have those conversations, the topic of a tape computer just keeps on coming back. It's just, everybody remembers that tape. I myself remember that also. Like I had that thing, and I remember like, yeah, you need to listen to it loading in, and then it boots up. So yeah, now we're spoiled. We don't have to do it anymore. And that also reminds me of another episode that we did with Nelson Nahum. So he actually brings the tape into the modern world. So he runs the company called Geyser Data, and they basically have a tape as a service now. So tape is back. Tape is back in
Wow.
2025. Yeah, so it's real. Okay, cool. So technology then started early, but then you have a quite of interesting entrepreneurial journey that lasted throughout most of your career. Could you speak a little bit more of how you started there? Which companies that you founded, that you were a part of, and I guess why you founded those companies in the first place? What drove you to do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first company that I started, I had a lot of ideas for companies I wanted to start back like in the late 90s and early 2000s. E-commerce was like a really big thing. And none of those ever really panned out because I was still in college and I was kind of focused on doing, college things, some of which was studying. And when I got out of college, I connected with I had started working on a project actually prior to going into college in late high school, which was basically like a B2G software as a service kind of app. And that app really started to kind of get some air underneath the wings and turned into a private company in early 2000s. I think it was 2001, 2002. It was a software as a service called publicsalary.com, and it's still around. It still services customers. But it was basically like a wage and benefit survey that local governments, cities, towns, counties, park districts, et cetera, would all sign up and share wage and benefit data with each other. And around the same time, I met Dominic, who would then become my co-founder for multiple companies. And he's really a genius at coming up with a lot of different kinds of ideas and, seeing 10, 20 years into the future and what an industry would do. And that really wasn't my cup of tea. My happy space was with the headphones on behind, NeoVim or Vim at the time and writing code. So the two of us, really found that we could work really well together, and we built a handful of companies, mostly in the web property development space. In the 2000s, we built a site level search engine, and that became popular all over the world as a free alternative to some rather expensive options at the time. And we had, our own ways of monetizing that with like different types of ad revenue from Google and AdSense and stuff. And then, that really kind of led its way to building a company called CloudSite. We built a couple of important products there. The first was CamFind. So the idea was like a visual search, Google for the physical world. And it's kind of funny because to this day, if you search in Google for CamFind versus Google Goggles was a Google version of visual search out at the time. And we did such a much better job of creating this visual search. CamFind, Google ended up taking down Google Goggles around the same time. So we always thought like we had a hand in that. And then of course it'd be, they're 5, 6, 7 years later until they released Google Lens, which is a lot better. That's better than the first version of CamFind. But at the same time, we also released an app for the blind and visually impaired called TapTapSee, using the same image recognition platform that we built called CloudSite. But the idea with that app was, if you're blind or visually impaired, you could take a picture of anything and then have the phone speak back to you what was in front of you. So both of these apps, millions of downloads in the App Store. We built a exciting, profitable company, served a lot of different types of marquee clients with CloudSite. Walmart, Kohl's, Letgo was a big one, and their whole idea of instead of Amazon's one-click purchase, they want to do one-click sell, where you could walk around your house just taking pictures of things and sell them online without having to type in all the stuff that you do with eBay. So I've always been excited about industries and areas that are challenging and that there isn't a whole lot of different types of competition, but like we're making a niche product that's at the same time very useful, and a lot of people are excited about, and we'll get a lot of use out of.
Okay, so could you speak a little bit more how then you transition from CloudSite into iAskNow?
Yeah, it's interesting. At CloudSite, we were really kind of the first to leverage, at the time, recurrent neural networks to build a captioning system. The idea being, in a lot of computer vision systems at the time, it would have a catalog of things that it would be able to recognize, and this was either with coarse-grained categories and in a classification system. But we wanted to do it where we would give it a list of vocabulary words, and then, like humans, we mix and match words to describe an infinite amount of things, whereas computer vision systems at the time would have a finite amount of things they could recognize, usually anywhere between several thousand to maybe 10,000 different classes that it could recognize, or objects, and more of an object recognition system. So we built this captioning system where it would essentially describe what it was looking at. And that was revolutionary at the time, especially in the commercial space. There's some academic work on it. Andre Karpathy and a couple others started experimenting with LSTM neural networks to build these kind of captioning systems. But we were really excited in, I think it was 2017, maybe 2018, when the whole BERT paper came out, and transformer networks started becoming more usable. And so we leveraged this idea of using transformer networks to build a small language model that was bolted into just a typical convolutional neural network feature detector, and use that to caption images. And that worked extraordinarily well, especially in the commercial space. But our exposure to, myself and my co-founder, to transformer networks really stimulated the desire that we had to build a web-wide search engine that we had started, when we first met in the early 2000s. And so in late 2022, we had, kind of been experimenting with this idea of leveraging large language models to build a search product. And then we launched what, would then become iask.ai in early 2023. And then shortly after we launched it, we started seeing a good uptick in traffic. And within about 9 months, we were doing just about 500,000 searches per day. So it really, really grew really fast. We always kind of think that one of the reasons why it's grown so fast and so well, especially word of mouth, we really weren't doing any marketing for it until very late last year, actually. But one of the reasons why we think it's grown so well is we did something fundamentally different with how we surface data into the context window that leverages our experience in search, especially that first decade building a search engine, that a lot of other companies that are building these kind of AI search products aren't doing. And that, I think, has really propelled us forward in terms of the accuracy with iask.ai. But yeah, so to go back to the beginning, it was really just this kind of, Dominic and I had been really excited about search ever since we met. And then, that plus the prevalence of larger and larger language models that could really tackle the web-wide search task finally made it possible for us to build what we had wanted to build for decades.
Yeah, definitely. The way you present the search results, it looks so much different than just basically regular text search or text search mixed with a little bit of AI. It's like it's basically the whole thing almost like analyzed. Yeah, it feels very different, and I've been actually using it quite regularly now. So okay, cool. So iask is groovy now. So obviously you went interesting journey all the way from like early hacking into now running a sizable company. So are you currently hands-on? Are you coding? Or if yes, how much?
Yeah, so I was coding full time, everything from the bottom up. I was doing until really kind of late last year. And then we started hiring up the team. We got some more back-end developers on, data scientists, front end, all that stuff that you need. But yeah, my favorite place is still to be, to do the hands-on coding work. I really enjoy that. And it's always been, kind of a favorite sort of, I can get lost in that world for hours at a time and forget to eat and stuff. So it's definitely still my favorite thing to do. But with iask, we started hiring up the team and getting more and more specialists involved really towards the beginning of 2024.
Yes, coding is very dangerous. Actually, it's a very dangerous thing for me that I forget that I have my CEO job to do. When I dragged into the coding due to my previous background, it's I guess, like you said, it's very so addicting that where you really forget about things. But yes, there's also other things that we should be doing besides that. Speaking of, you mentioned specialization, the team. So I guess those are two areas where every technology leader runs into those type of challenges where you do need to have the team going. And then you started talking about the bringing specialization roles, but let's do one thing at a time. So you mentioned you started, hiring up the team. Which are different channels that you use for which purpose in specific to staffing up your team? Like where do you use referrals? Well, I guess, how do you use it? Which sources that you use, and which source you would use for which purpose as a technology leader in regards to staffing the team?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this changes all the time. We've had a lot of success both with recruiters for software engineers, and then also for, we've used some outsourcing or offshoring techniques. But then we've also done, some work with a recruiter that I had met, some years prior. So, really looking at local networking that, people that we've met over the years and going through those routes. We generally, for hiring, we don't really do like a broad cast a wide net sort of hiring process, just because there's, at least for a startup, there's just so much work you have to do to make sure that you're hiring people that really know what they're doing and aren't just saying what they're doing. I've never been a big fan of coding tests per se, because I think that they do a really good job at testing programmers how well they can take a test, but not necessarily how well they can solve real world problems. So there's things like, leet code is great for, trying to sharpen particular skills, but those aren't necessarily the skills that you use on a day-to-day basis. So a back-end engineer needs to solve problems specific to back-end engineering. An iOS developer needs to be solving problems specific to mobile app development. And so things like leet code, while it's great, to test if a developer knows how to develop an algorithm, your average engineer is not developing algorithms every single day. They're solving real world problems. And so, those tests are great for, maybe some gatekeeping at a very basic level. But most of the time, what we look for is, do you have some sort of passion project that you're building on the side? What does that look like? Are you able to reason about that? Do you, and if you don't have a passion project, are you working on open source? Do you have some contributions to some OSS project in GitHub? Those types of things show us, and have helped me hire really good candidates that we know are passionate about programming. That programming is the kind of thing they would be doing on the nights and weekends if they didn't have a full-time job in programming. That's the kind of person we want. Somebody who's passionate about it and who's putting in the time to become an expert on something in particular. And the other thing we look at too, in terms of hiring, is we want to hire experts that are really good at a particular, vertical inside of programming. So, generally we don't hire generalists. We like to focus on developers, engineers, AIML specialists that are really good at one particular vertical inside of programming. Like, for example, we just hired an amazing iOS developer, and he's a specialist in iOS native, Swift and Swift UI development. He's not, Android and React Native and all of these things all bundled into one. Same thing with, I always kind of, and I get a lot of flack for this, I always kind of shudder at the word full stack. I'm not a fan of the full stack developer. I'm very opinionated about this, but that's because, if you work on the entire stack per se, like, there's a lot of things about HTML and CSS that an expert in HTML and CSS can make a very robust, very well structured front end that, somebody who doesn't know that stuff, doesn't know the ins and outs of all the different quirks and hacks and stuff in different browsers. And browsers, of course, have gotten a lot better in the past decade or so. But there's still a lot of things that, a specialist would know that somebody who's full stack might not. So we tend to focus on specialties. And that, of course, you can get into this whole discussion about AI taking over programmers' jobs and stuff like that. But if you have a specialty like that, it's a lot harder to replicate than somebody who's, say, a generalist that kind of knows a lot of things at a surface level.
Yeah, interesting. So generalist versus specialist. So you mentioned you chose going the specialist route. With the specialist route, the downside of that versus picking up the generalist route is that it requires more coordination between highly specialized areas. So how do you manage that and compensate for it in your team?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, we've always been remote Dominic and I have a lot of experience working remote for decades now. And so one thing we try to optimize for really particularly is asynchronous communication through, Slack, Discord, email, those types of things. Obviously, as engineers, we need that kind of focused time. But then on the off times where we're, getting our head above water, or out of the coding editors and stuff like that, having that kind of async communications channel is really important. So we try to optimize around that and just make sure that everybody has an open channel. I mean, one of the things that we have internally at IASC is we make sure that there's a relatively flat hierarchy so that everybody can easily communicate with each other. That, you know, the engineers can communicate with those that are doing the product design or the you know, the UI UX. The UX developer can communicate with the backend engineers, and there's just a really open communication channel, and that tends to work pretty well. And then we document things in GitHub, issue tracking, you know, that sort of stuff. But it tends to work pretty well. You know, as the company grows, I'm sure this will kind of morph into different, you know, a little bit different, but this has been really optimal, and it's allowed us to accomplish a lot of stuff with a relatively small team. You know, even at CloudSite, we built some incredible, groundbreaking, like award-winning software that was built with a really small team of, you know, just a couple back-end engineers, front-end developer, and it's a very small team. So we tend to be
Yeah.
very capital efficient in that way too.
No, that's awesome. I mean, small teams go, you know, a long way, especially if it run in the right way and the right people in the right seats. So, are you bringing people? You mentioned you're all remote. Are you bringing people for gatherings in person, like you know, every year, every half a year, or something like that?
Yeah, we like to do that. So previously, you know, at CloudSite, when we were working remotely, we'd try to have these kind of get-togethers and gatherings at least once a quarter, I think is the kind of pace that we were doing it at. And so it's been too soon to, we just have actually hired another big hiring sprint not too long ago. So it's been too soon to have one of these. We would like to do one of these later this year. But yeah, to your point, you know, when you have a remote first company, it's important to get people together underneath the same roof, and not even really necessarily to work, but just to kind of, you know, build that camaraderie and team, and just get a chance to kind of hang out once in a while. So what's interesting about that versus like an office environment is that, because I've been in both, and what ends up happening, especially as an engineer in an office environment, is there always these like constant interruptions during the day, and it gets so hard to get something done, at least for me. And a lot of our engineers have been, yeah, like you need that focus time with the headphones on and just, you know, uninterrupted time. And when you're working remote, you know, even if you're sitting in a cafe, it's like you have that kind of focused time. Whereas in an office, the expectation is, you know, you can always get interrupted by somebody walking into your office, or, you know, interrupting you to ask you a question. And for engineers especially, that's horribly unproductive. So yeah, you know, we try to get people together. You know, at this company, it hasn't happened yet, but we're thinking to do something later this year and then get on a good pace of doing that. That type of stuff really helps. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another thing. It's about keeping, well, no pun intended, right balance. So basically, that's another thing is that remote is awesome. Then you have people very focused on productivity. Like you said, also you create a lot of visibility in terms of who does what, looking in GitHub and you know, documenting things. But it's good to have a real human-to-human connection in that world. In fact, actually, the longer remote environment goes, the more need for that human connection happens, especially for people who never saw each other. So that kind of gathering, 1-2 day gathering, or whatever gathering in person with the whole team, it can go a long way. It's just those connections form. It's very different to, you know, to see the person face to face as opposed to seeing them in Zoom. So, but that's where we live in. So lots more remote now, and like you said, it has good advantages. In addition to that, no commute and all other awesome things that you get with remote work, and you know, there are other advantages there as well. So in any case, I want to get back to a few questions about how you hired the team, because some of those things are that you said there have been very interesting. One is that algorithm type of challenges versus solving real problems, and hiring people who is geared towards solving real problems rather than algorithm challenges. I often make a joke about this. That's the only time you need to implement the bubble sort is at the job interview. So after that, you never actually have to do it. But how do you find that in the interview, do you have them solve some sort of real problem? Do you drop them into the project as a part of the interview? Do you have any special techniques there to share with the rest of the technology leaders?
Yeah, so and I can speak from my experience hiring up with CloudSite too, because lately, like with iAsk, we haven't actually gone through this hiring process ourselves yet, because we've gone through both recruiters and then also through this other recruiter. But so they've done their own kind of battery of tests, and typically when it gets to our desk or my desk in particular, I'm looking through, like what kind of things have they worked on and stuff like that. So there's a little bit, all that pre-screening has really kind of gotten completed. But typically what I like to do is have them work on either a take-home problem, something that's like, part of what they would work on at the company. And, that can be a current problem that, we had recently solved and see how they would solve it. Or it could be a toy problem that they could look at, uh, something that's actually what they would be working on in a day-to-day role at the company. We try to find stuff that's relevant and applicable, and then use that as a way of testing instead of doing something that's like, bubble sort or other types of algorithms that we all know we're going to reach for a library. We're not gonna try to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, yeah. The bubble sort is in the interview land only. Okay, awesome. So where do you find all that energy to continue entrepreneurial journey? Because entrepreneurial journey is definitely not easy.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Elon Musk was quoted something about saying being an entrepreneur is like staring into the abyss and chewing on glass. It's not a very pleasant experience sometimes. It's funny. I've always had this passion for uh, building products that people really enjoy. I've been doing this for as long as I can remember. And what really gets me motivated and gets me out of the bed in the morning is when I'm building something that I know is useful to people and they're actively using, and they have some sort of, use, feedback, passion, or even hate for the product. So there's that passion there, whether it's on the good side or the bad side, then you're going in the right direction. And so, I've just always really enjoyed that rather than having somebody else, than working on somebody else's thing or having somebody else, tell me what to do. And, that's taken a lot of different shapes over the years. I mean, when I've been at companies, it's being able to take ownership on a particular project and then, really drive hard on optimizing something or, building out a particular thing for that product. But that ownership stake is really what makes me excited about something. If it's just, doing a thing and handing it over, then it's not quite as rewarding to me, and it just doesn't make me as excited. But yeah, I don't know what drives me to do that. It'd certainly be easier if I didn't have this drive, but I do, at the end of the day, I think I'd get bored if I wasn't working on something like challenging like this.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess your outline, you described it very well in terms of ownership and the passion for the product. So that's something that you're passionate about, and that's what drives you forward. Because yeah, entrepreneurial journey is definitely full of challenges, and it's a roller coaster every day, multiple times a day. So there has to be something that drives you through it. Is there anything else you would like to share with the community that will be helpful for going through the journey of other technology leaders?
Yeah, I think, well, especially with the software engineers, there's a lot of talk right now about AI, taking over programmers and all this stuff. And I don't think that's anywhere close to happening. Of course, who knows, maybe I'll eat my words in 10 years or so if AGI becomes a thing. So for engineers in particular, I would say, find something, if you're into software engineering, if you're into programming, things that a vertical inside of software engineering that you really enjoy and you really want to go really deep on, whether that's, certain things about AI ML, maybe you get really, really deep on certain types of backend engineering, certain types of languages and frameworks. And, we tend to use functional languages at iAsk.ai and have gotten really into Elixir and those types of things. So like find stuff that you're really passionate about inside of programming and become an absolute expert on a certain, in a certain domain in programming. And that way you'll build skills that are really valuable to companies, and then also guard yourself against a lot more of the developments that are coming down the pipe with AI, and understand that AI is a tool, just another tool in the toolbox that you can use as an engineer to make your job easier. Instead of writing the same boilerplate code again and again or leveraging templates, you can leverage AI as a tool to help debug things, or get some of the template code out of the way so you're not doing something that's boring. Instead, you're focusing on things that are really exciting and interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely good thoughts there in terms of AI taking over jobs and programmer jobs. Yeah, it's not a tool. I think I do also see a lot of resistance from professionals to AI. And the one thing I encourage everybody, not only programmers, but also artists and other professions, is to use it as a tool. Like you said, there's no need to reinvent, I wouldn't say reinvent the wheel, but whatever used to be done by hands can now be done from a prompt. And there's no reason for not to turn that into the tool in your arsenal and keeping studying the new thing, the something that's happened as a next chapter. Okay, awesome. So thanks a lot for joining. I think it's been great, Brad. So thank you a lot for sharing lots of wonderful insights. And Ruben, I'll transition it over to you so you can close up the episode.
Likewise.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So thank you again for joining us. Definitely a very joyful conversation. I'm sure that some of the people who's listening will get a lot of insights and apply them to the times we're living in right now. For those who are listening, remember to follow up our channel and get to know all of our guests. We are definitely coming with new episodes soon, and hope you have enjoyed this one. Share it with whoever you think might be of help. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Did you enjoy this video? Then hit the like button and share it with your network. Also be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.